right. Thank you, Anne. If you want to start introductions, that would be wonderful.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. So hello, everyone. I'm Anne Graham from ICF. I serve as the project director as well as the one of our child welfare subject matter experts. So it's fantastic to be able to be here with you on the fourth session, and we're excited that you joined us. So thanks so much. I'm going to pass it now to Donna to share and introduce herself, and then on to Maddie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Kleigholtz. I'm the research evaluator along with Anna Gross, who we work together on the evaluation portion. She was not able to be here today, so we'll be sort of filling in for her. And I'll pass it to Maddie now.
Thanks, Donna. I'm Maddie Langen, also with the ICF team. I was a researcher on this team and got to work with our great lived experience work group. And then I'll pass it over to you, Yumiko.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yumiko Doherty. I'm an independent contractor, and my role on this project was to really serve as a liaison to ensure that the ICF team was able to navigate Colorado's wonderfully complex child welfare system, make sure they had access to the people and the resources that they needed throughout the process to really meet the statutory requirements. You're on mute, Jordan.
It's the fourth one. You think it would be an opposite. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our team before I pull up the slide deck, just so everyone can keep an eye on who is talking. And thank you all for your patience.
Spotlight successful.
Okay, now I will pull up the deck and I will kick us off with the PowerPoint, but the people you see on your screen will do the majority of the presentation. So all right, thank you again for your patience. Can everyone see the slide deck okay?
Yes, we see the full slide deck. There you go. Got it.
Thank you. All right, so again, welcome to the fourth and final information session for the audit required by House Bill 24-1046. Before we dive too deep into the audit, we wanted to take a moment to give a little bit of background on the project. As many of you know, the Office of the Colorado Child Protection Ombudsman serves as an independent and neutral entity in the state of Colorado. So we are charged with taking on questions and concerns about the child protection system and working to independently review those cases that come into our office. And House Bill 24-1046, which required the audit, originated from the Colorado Child Welfare System Interim Study Committee, which sat in 2023. The CPO was invited to come in and present its perspective on issues impacting the child protection system to legislators who sat on that panel. And during that presentation, the CPO's concerns with consistency and use of the safety and risk assessment tools, varied outcomes, and reporting and transparency of the tools were issues that we presented because we had seen those concerns come up over and over again in the cases that were individually coming into our office. So we presented this issue to that legislative panel, and the legislators sitting on that panel picked up that issue and put it into House Bill 24-1046, which was one of the key bills that emerged from that interim study committee. Following the passage of that legislation, we were tasked, or within that legislation, the CPO is tasked with hiring a third-party entity to conduct an audit of Colorado's risk and safety assessment tools. That audit would be confined to the 9 directives that you see in front of you here. The bill outlined what the audit was to focus on, required that if appropriate, it would issue findings and recommendations. I won't list these here to you, but if as we go through this presentation, you're wondering why the team focused on certain bits of information, material, or key points, it's because it was outlined for them in statute. So this work really worked within those guardrails on how to look at this system. So again, as I mentioned before, the CPO is required to contract with a third-party entity to conduct this audit. And we knew very early on that this is an issue that impacts many facets of the child welfare and child protection system. So we assembled an evaluation team with a couple key stakeholders to try and get perspective from the start of this project. So we just brought that team together. It included the Division of Child Welfare, representatives from county human service departments, Office of the Child's Representative, Office of Response Parents Council, and a parent with lived experience to assess the proposals that were coming in. Ultimately, we selected ICF, which is the team you will see here today, to come on and perform the audit for us. So I am now going to hand it over to Anne to walk through what that audit looked like. Anne?
Great. Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it. So as Jordan opened up and shared, so really we were able to delineate the different roles between the Child Protection Ombudsman's office and ICF throughout at the beginning and then maintained throughout. So the office of the Colorado Child Protection Ombudsman's did provide that overall oversight and structure for us to be sure that ICF was able to research and audit all of the critical elements of the statute, including the 9 directives that you saw previously. CPO also partnered with Yumiko Doherty, who you met earlier, of Ignite the Change LLC, to serve as that project manager and liaison between ICF and the state of Colorado and counties within Colorado to be sure that our team understood the context of Colorado's work and were able to access the right folks at the state county levels, as well as stakeholders throughout the community so that we were able to complete and inform the audit. Our role really centered on designing and refining the methods for research, data collection, engaging those very stakeholders to hear their experience and expertise, to collect and analyze that data that we then were able to compile as reflected in the findings of the final report that you've read or seen or summarized to be able to meet each of the directives of the audit. Next slide, please. Our overall approach was to be sure that we were hitting all sections and all spaces of the requirements of House Bill 24-1046. So our team developed a multi-level mixed methods approach designed to capture the individual, family, and systems level perspectives, as you see here on the slide. This integrated design enabled our team to be able to corroborate findings from multiple data sources, thereby mitigating single method bias and enhancing the rigor of the overall audit and reliability of the results in our findings along the way. This approach also emphasized stakeholder engagement throughout this process. It was iterative, and though it was stepwise in its data collection, we were able to do this in collaboration with Yumiko, who provided the essential coordination and connection throughout. In our time together today, we're going to review the team's methodology, our data sources, and a review of finding per directive throughout the afternoon. We wanted to, though, show a quick timeline of our activities. So it's hard to believe that it's been a year, though it has been. It's gone by pretty quickly. So as you can see here, we wanted to provide a snippet of our activities that were reflected here. Throughout, you'll see that we did engage stakeholders, as noted, to allow for the most robust process possible, beginning from late winter of 2025 through March of 2026 here. Each phase of the audit built upon the efforts that came before it. For example, the research around best practice and discussions with the work group participants informed the development of the rubrics that we later used in evaluating Colorado's assessment tools, policies, and the cases. It also informed the development of survey, focus group, and interview questions. I'll now pass it to Maddie, excuse me, who's going to share more about engaging stakeholders.
Thank you, Anne. I'm going to walk through a key part of our engagement strategy, which was collaborating with the stakeholders who know the system and tool best. This ensured that our findings were not only technically sound, but also grounded in the realities of those that are most impacted. We had 2 ongoing stakeholder groups, the Lived Experience Work Group, and we also had a Human Services Workforce Work Group. These work groups met monthly, providing continuous feedback and guidance on the work. We also engaged in more targeted interviews and discussions, which I'll dive deeper into later. But the work groups and their contributions ultimately ensured we had the local context and that shared experiences were a part of the data collection process. But before I expand on contributions, I'm going to walk us through our recruitment process and who actually was in these groups. To ensure that we included the right voices, we began by sending formal invitations and an interest form to a diverse group of potential participants. You can see those groups to the right of the slide here. So for our Workforce Work Group, we sent out invites to the 64 county human service directors through the Colorado Human Services Directors Association. And for our Lived Experience Work Group, we sent them to the following organizations listed to the right there. And then we did some more targeted recruitment for areas that were lacking representation. When reviewing responses, we considered several factors to ensure that there was meaningful representation here. Some of those considerations were type of lived experience, workforce experience, familiarity with the tools, race and ethnicity, regional representation, and of course, availability to participate in these monthly meetings. Lived experts were compensated for their time and contributions. And then on the next slide, we could dive into the demographics of those groups. For the Lived Experience Work Group, we had individuals across 4 different regions, each bringing unique perspectives based on their lived experience. This included parents with lived experience, primarily, and 2 former foster youth. For the Workforce Work Group, we had frontline staff across 5 different regions, representing 7 counties, and we had 5 caseworkers and 3 supervisors in that group. Now to expand on the contributions that I mentioned earlier, these work groups served as a primary source of information and really ensured that we had that local and lived experience lens on this evaluation. Using various data collection processes, we use the workforce meetings to the work group meetings. I keep mixing up workforce work group meetings to gather information on each area of analytic focus in the legislation. We use these structured discussion guides in the work group meetings to explore topics like barriers to completing assessments in real time, the impacts of race and ethnicity on practice and decision making, and geographic variability, how assessments are being used for domestic violence and intimate partner violence, perceptions of the tools, how the assessments are used to support case decision making, and feedback on Colorado's current practice compared to the national best practice, which I'll get into later as well. These work groups allowed us to capture firsthand insights from those closest to the work and the families being served. And we know including these voices are essential for driving meaningful, lasting change. And now I'll go ahead and walk us through the review of documents and best practices, like I mentioned. Thank you. Along with kicking off the work groups, early on in the project, we conducted a literature review to gain an understanding of the best practices that are associated with safety and risk assessments nationally. We used a systematic process, starting with identifying search terms and inclusion criteria, to screening titles and abstracts, full texts, and then synthesizing the results from 30 articles selected as most relevant. We continued this process throughout the entirety of the project as new research was published and as project partners direct us to various resources. Overall, a major takeaway from this process is that there's more research needed that explicitly examines best practice that's associated with safety and risk assessments. However, the articles we did find served as the foundation for the creation of our data collection protocols and later on our data analysis. And the resulting publications from this research are included as citations in our final report. HB 24-1046 also specifically calls for the audit to identify tools and resources to ensure the assessment is carried out consistently. In order to comply with this directive, ICF developed a comprehensive document request outlining the types of materials that were relevant to the audit. ICF used a systematic approach to review documents that were relevant to the audit. A document review rubric was developed based on national best practice research I just mentioned, and input from the work groups and applied the materials submitted by the state representatives. And you can see these in Appendix C. The rubric examined key criteria related to tool design and guidance, including clarity of definitions, use of plain language, completion requirements, and consideration of caregiver and child factors. The rubric also assessed training-related criteria, such as the availability of interactive learning opportunities and attention to bias and cultural responsiveness, as well as risk assessment criteria, including definitions of risk, use of prior abuse or neglect, differentiation between abuse and neglect scoring, and consideration of caregiver factors. Additionally, to collect more in-depth perspectives from project partners that weren't affiliated with project work groups, the ICF team conducted 6 focus groups and 2 stakeholder interviews over Microsoft Teams. You can see the list of groups that we spoke to in the slide here, with participant consent for recording and transcription, of course. Audio recordings were securely stored internally, and identifying information was never linked to specific comments or views in any resulting documents. Access to notes and materials were restricted to authorized ICF staff through password-protected ICF intranet systems. The ICF team employed a thematic coding approach across all qualitative data and developed a code book that aligns with the bill requirements to map conversations to key items. Analysis also included open coding, in which coders examined transcripts to identify and label emerging concepts without imposing preconceived categories. This inductive approach allowed the team to remain grounded in the data and responsive to the unanticipated themes that might have come up. And transcripts were uploaded into Deduce for cross-validation of themes, enhancing the reliability and rigor of the analysis. Also, alongside all this, to capture as many perspectives as possible more widely, the ICF team also designed 3 tailored surveys targeting county workforce, legal professionals, and individuals with lived experience. Each survey was customized to its audience, and questions were organized according to the audit items outlined in the bill. Questions combined Likert scale items with open-ended responses to capture both quantitative and qualitative insights. The workforce survey included an additional component to assess inter-rater reliability, requiring respondents to review hypothetical scenarios and determine whether imminent danger was present. The purpose of these scenarios was to ensure information was gathered about the inter-rater reliability legislative item. Prior to distributing these surveys, scenarios were validated by workforce workgroup members for accuracy, while the lived experience workgroup members reviewed survey framing to ensure cultural relevancy and accessibility in these surveys. Once the survey closed, responses were exported from Qualtrics, cleaned, and imported into a statistical software platform for editing and analysis, IBM SPSS Statistics for Analysis. And a qualitative analysis of open text survey responses was conducted to identify the emerging themes from this. And also, I just want to highlight in our blue left-hand box there, our survey sample size. We will end up referencing some of the survey later on, so just so you folks see that there. And then I'll pass it over to Donna.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. So as an in-depth complement to the more expansive data that Maddie just described, the case review process was designed to evaluate how Colorado's family safety and risk assessment tools are applied and documented. The goal was to assess alignment with policy, consistency in application, and variation in risk and safety determinations using a sample that was representative of the larger population, but also within the time and budget constraints of this audit. The ICF team worked with DCW to implement a stratified sampling approach based on known variance factors such as location, race, ethnicity. The sampling included cases of families that have been involved in the Child Welfare Agency. We identified a targeted sample of 16 cases that would meet the depth required by the directives. Data was de-identified and personal information was redacted, and no other information was redacted. So just to contrast, unlike standard CFSR reviews, which typically include at least 65 cases for a very broad systemic assessment, This approach emphasized intensive fidelity testing over sample size. Since it was a small sample, this enabled the team to integrate and triangulate case file data with other data sources and also stakeholder input to evaluate the application of the tools at key decision points, which provided a more comprehensive and detailed view of the geographic, racial, and case type variations than the larger reviews would typically allow. For example, the assessment tool itself has a checkbox that's completed that says the tool was completed with the family. All the assessments that we looked at checked yes. However, when we looked in the case logs and files, it was not clear that the assessments were done at the first contact. It maybe was not possible at that time. Additionally, we heard from frontline workers very clearly in the quantitative data and on the survey and focus groups that it's very challenging to complete assessments in real time with the families in the field. And on the surveys, only 32% said they did complete the surveys in real time, and they think only 28% of other staff complete the tools in real time. So this is how we were able to triangulate the data. To support the review, ICF developed a comprehensive rubric to systematically capture and analyze the quantitative and qualitative data from the case files. Rubric components evaluated the quality and completeness of case file documents and of the safety and risk assessments separately. Overall case ratings were made using basic criteria which are outlined in the state's Volume 7, and we combined this with best practice elements outlined by the American Bar Association's publication called Child Safety, a Guide for Judges and Attorneys, which provides a very rigorous framework for child safety assessment and establishes a consistent model for judges and attorneys. The key elements established a structured, fact-based analytical process for child welfare decisions. The case types reviewed included 5 cases that were closed at assessment with no determination, 5 cases with an initial determination and an out-of-home placement, and the tools were applied at assessment and throughout ongoing casework, and then 6 cases with an initial determination and the children and youth remained at home with safety plans. Some of the reasons for referral included abandonment, sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, sex trafficking, health and hygiene, suicidal ideation, physical and psychological abuse, and violence involving guns. Ages of victims range from newborn infants to 15 years. 8 victims were female and 7 were male. Allegations were most often characterized as injurious environment with abuse and/or neglect. And a total score then was based on the number of criteria met for each case. All the case files included at least 1 complete safety assessment and Colorado risk assessment. Additional case documentation such as contact logs, initial assessment summary, case safety closure, and referral summaries were also included, which provided rich contextual and qualitative information for us. Next slide. So as we described earlier, to address the requirements, the ICF team developed a multi-level, which means capturing data at the individual, family, and system level perspectives, and a mixed method approach, which includes all of the types of methods that we just described to you in detail. Qualitative data was analyzed, as Maddie described, using thematic coding methods, and this allowed us to corroborate and triangulate findings from the multiple data sources that you see depicted on this slide. And as Maddie also described, we emphasized stakeholder engagement and iterative stepwise data collection. The ICF team also included the subject matter experts in child welfare safety assessment, program audits, and lived experience. We developed feedback loops to validate the draft tools, rubrics, and preliminary findings. The research on best practice served as the foundation for comparative analysis of the Colorado's policies, procedures, and assessment tools, and as a basis for the development of data collection measures and rubrics. The audit was conducted in collaboration with the CPO liaison, whom we met earlier, who provided essential coordination. So we've now concluded the methodology discussion or description, and we're going to pause right now and see if there's any questions. We'll remain on this screen for a few minutes and see if we have any questions in the chat that we might respond to, or if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question about the information delivered so far.
And hi, Donna, this is Yumiko. There is one question in the chat from Courtney asking whether caseworkers identified specific reasons why it was prohibitive to complete the tools in the field. And I know you're going to definitely get to this in the findings section of the presentation, so don't know if you want to hold off on that one.
Sure. No, but I mean, yes, they did identify multiple reasons, and not surprisingly, it's things like it was technology issues. There's just engagement, family engagement, and that it did not seem appropriate at that time to be filling out a form. Many of them did the interviews and then filled out the forms later. So there were a variety of different reasons. And again, as Yumiko said, we will be giving the detailed findings, summary of findings in the next section. Any other questions about the methods? Okay, I don't want to like jump the gun here, so if we need to pause a little longer, Jordan, you let me know.
No, I don't see anything additional in the chat. Again, if you continue to percolate on a couple of thoughts, we will have a big question section at the end. So if you don't raise your questions now, it's okay. I promise we will make space for all of them at the end. So I think we'll probably head into the next slide, Donna, if that's okay.
Okay. So in terms of the findings, before we go into the findings, we wanted to emphasize that the audit was designed to provide a 360-degree review of the tools. So we use these numerous data sources with the aim to create a comprehensive view. Colorado's system, we want to make sure that we reflect that Colorado's system and the overall strength of this system and the contextual factors as we've depicted them here on this slide. So the strengths of Colorado, that staff are dedicated and committed to getting it right. This was something that came through in not only just the initial engagement of people in the study, but also in their comments. Tools are aligned with Colorado policy. That was a plus. There are clearly defined safety thresholds. New worker training incorporates opportunities to practice using the tool. Caseworkers demonstrate strong agreement on clear safety threats. And Colorado benefits from a committed workforce capable of driving meaningful improvements. We understand that what's happening in Colorado right now is the context in which we're working, and that there are funding and budgetary conversations and constraints that are occurring that impact staff and community organizations at every level. The structure of the child welfare system as a state supervised and county administered introduces variability in local implementation, but on the positive side, also some flexibility to address local needs and adjust to resource limitations. And again, there's ongoing organizational changes that affect the context in which these results can be interpreted. Okay. So we will start, as I said earlier, we will go through each of the directives and provide a summary of the results and recommendations for each. So Directive 1 was identify tools and resources to ensure risk and safety assessments are carried out consistently. A major finding of this audit is that the tools are well aligned with the policy standards, as I mentioned earlier, and contain guidance for assessing safety, danger, and risk. However, across all data sources, we found through guidance and instructions exist, conceptual clarity for tool constructs remains unclear. A few examples of this include primary and secondary caregiver, conceptualizations of vulnerability and caregiver functioning. Additionally, specific to the risk assessment, there is an over-reliance on historical factors. Together, this inconsistent conceptual clarity, imprecise definitions, and risk assessment challenges introduce possible bias and inconsistency in documentation. This subjectivity was also noted across our data sources through commentary around the tools, not fully supporting complex family situations, such as domestic violence or cultural considerations. So based on this, we recommend redefine the safety and risk using observable behavior-based criteria to reduce subjectivity, revise or replace the risk assessment tool to reduce reliance on historical factors, strengthen fidelity monitoring statewide, and align policies with ethical and equity standards to minimize unintended harm. We have some examples of the kinds of responses we got that support these findings and recommendations. And so we have them on each of these slides, and you'll see them in blue boxes on each slide. On the workforce survey, 48% of the workforce agreed tools are applied uniformly. On the legal survey, 66% disagreed that the tools are applied uniformly. So you see a difference in the respondents' perspectives. Lived experience survey respondents generally felt the assessment process was unclear, lacked opportunities for questions, and did not encourage open communication. They expressed significant concerns about transparency and fairness. Parents described their experiences with the assessment process as confusing, negative, disrespectful, and inconsistently applied. 80% reported that the assessment process was not clearly explained. Next slide. Directive 2 was to identify gaps in solutions to enable caseworkers to complete the risk or safety assessment in real time while in the field. And we mentioned this earlier. We had a question around that. But findings from multiple data sources indicated significant challenges in completing safety assessment tools in real time. The results suggest that technological limitations, time constraints, and tool complexity are primary barriers to the real-time assessment completion, with documentation inconsistencies further complicating verification of the family involvement. Instructions require assessments to be completed with families, but lack guidance on documenting this or explaining results to families. Completed family safety assessment tools sometimes indicate family participation, but the family risk assessment tools rarely do. So some examples of the findings were that the workforce survey, as I mentioned earlier, most indicate, 32% reported being able to complete assessment tools during the field visit, which means most were not able to complete them. They stress that it's very difficult to complete the assessment tools live with a family because questions are inorganic to ask in a conversational format, particularly when caseworkers have just met a family and they are trying to build trust with them. So based on these results, we recommend strengthen real-time documentation capability via mobile offline tools and simplified design, improve documentation of family involvement with explicit fields and aligned narratives, provide some more information. Next slide. Directive 3 targeted examining the impacts of geography when using risk or safety assessments. The family safety and risk assessment tools are not applied consistently statewide. Differences in county resources, staffing levels, technology infrastructure, supervision capacity, and community service availability, especially between urban and rural communities, drive varied implementation. Geographic variability significantly affects the consistency of tool implementation across multiple jurisdictions, and rural counties struggle with limited service availability. These differences underscore the need for flexibility and clarity in tool design to accommodate diverse contexts related to resource availability. One of the quotes that we felt was compelling, one of the respondents said, "A safety assessment in a metro area that has 300 Medicaid providers is going to look very different than a community that has 4 Medicaid providers and 1 nonprofit." Additionally, on the lived experience survey, 67% did not think assessments were implemented consistently geographically. On the legal professionals survey, only 24% agreed that the tools are applied uniformly. The workforce survey were more positive about consistency, but still only about half, 57%, perceive the tools are used consistently regardless of geographic location. So we have some of those results on the bottom of the slide. As a result, we have some recommendations: invest in technology access, mobile devices, and connectivity to enable real-time documentation and reduce disparities. Create a shared services model for supervision and consultation, and provide surge staffing for small counties. Also, address service availability gaps by partnering to expand healthcare, behavioral health, and housing supports, and adjust tool guidance where scarcity persists. Next slide. Directive 4 was to examine the impacts of race and ethnicity when using the risk or safety assessments and how they affect communities that are overrepresented in the child welfare system. The race and ethnicity considerations within the safety and risk assessments revealed significant gaps in cultural responsiveness and equity. The document review showed that race and ethnicity are inconsistently documented in the tools, limiting analysis of disproportionality. And some case notes observed in the case review included subjective language without context, making it difficult to decipher the race and ethnicity of caregivers or children. Further, the reliance on economic factors as part of the family risk assessment reinforces the conflation of poverty and neglect in child welfare, which can impact overall risk scores and decisions. Communication with families is often unclear and culturally misaligned, reducing trust and engagement. Colorado's current child welfare assessment tools and practices were reported to be not culturally responsive, and in many cases actively perpetuate racial and ethnic inequities, primarily due to inconsistent documentation, the biased use of historical data, limited cultural understanding, and ineffective communication with families. For example, on the lived experience survey, 67% of parents reported that professionals did not explain the assessment results clearly. Most, meaning 60%, felt that their values and beliefs were not respected. Only 27% of parents believed the process honored their cultural history, race, and ethnicity. On the legal survey, 14% felt the assessment tools adequately reflected cultural backgrounds of children, youth, and families served. On the workforce survey, although most did not view race and ethnicity as barriers, confidence in consistent application across groups was limited. 36% were confident that the tools were applied consistently across groups. So based on these findings, we recommend standardizing the culturally responsive documentation that ensures family histories, strengths, and cultural identities are captured accurately and respectfully. Redesign the tools to reduce embedded bias by limiting reliance on outdated or disproportionate records, integrate and strengthen family diversity and bias mitigation training for staff, and adopt engagement methods that center family voice and agency. Next slide. Directive 5, evaluate and recommend best practices for sharing risk and safety assessments with families, legal professionals, and the judicial branch. Clear communication of safety and risk assessment findings to families, child welfare partners, and judicial professionals is essential for transparency and informed decision-making. Families and legal professionals rarely receive assessment results in a timely, clear, or understandable way, creating widespread transparency issues and undermining trust in the child welfare process. Our results reveal inconsistent practices across counties and the need for culturally responsive, plain language communication. The Colorado Family Safety and Risk Assessment results are inconsistently shared with families and legal stakeholders, often lacking clarity, cultural sensitivity, or literacy-appropriate communication. Often the results are not shared with the legal professionals until the judicial discovery process. On the lived experience survey, for example, only 13% felt the safety and risk assessment process was clearly explained. On the legal survey, 76% disagreed that a clear process exists for sharing assessment results. Workforce workers feel more confident communicating results, but lack structured training and a defined process to do so. 32% reported training included practice delivering results to stakeholders. So as a result, recommendations are to standardize statewide assessment sharing protocols for family and legal partners, require timely, plain language sharing of results directly with families, strengthen training and coaching for caseworkers in communication and cultural responsiveness, and promote transparent, family-centered communication practices. Next slide. 6 out of 9, I'm getting there. Evaluate and recommend best practices for training on risk and safety assessments. Training on the Colorado tools exists as part of 109-hour foundational training that new caseworkers complete in the 3-day Safety Through Engagement seminar. The course description notes the tools will be incorporated in learning through facilitation using the Colorado safety assessment tools. 91% of staff, for example, received the CWTS training. Our findings indicated that training for new staff, though, is heavily front-loaded, theoretical, and inconsistent across counties, and insufficiently practice-oriented. Caseworkers feel overwhelmed and need more applied learning, coaching, and cultural humility training. Across all of our data sources, stakeholders consistently identified gaps in training and application of training related to the tools. Academy training was often described as limited, overly conceptual, and not reflective of real-world casework. Supervisors frequently serve as interpretive authorities. Timing challenges reduce the learning transfer when the training actually precedes the worker's field experience. So overall, while formal training exists through CWTS and county-specific programs, its effectiveness is limited by timing, varied content, and instructional planning and delivery, and a lack of consistent practical application. Some examples. This is the workforce were the only respondents on this, the only survey that included training questions because they're the only ones that would have received the training. So workforce only was surveyed. 43% had training on addressing racial and cultural considerations. 62% positively felt prepared to use the tools, and 69% felt confident in applying them correctly. And as I mentioned earlier, 91% received CWTS training. So what we recommend is expanding the application-based real-world training, mandating training on cultural humility, bias mitigation, and trauma-informed skills, and optimizing the timing and sequencing of the training to align better with worker field exposure and include boosters and refreshers. Next slide. Directive 7, examine risk and safety assessments for domestic violence or intimate partner violence and recommend best practices. The current risk assessment tool includes 2 domestic violence DV-related questions with clarifications only in the instructions but not in the tool itself. Language can be punitive or victim blaming, and DV history is inconsistently defined. It is unclear how the tool actually drives decisions here. Concerns center on victim blaming language and a lack of nuance around coercive control. The lived experience workgroup flagged phrases such as caregiver engages in domestic violence and parent is unwilling to protect as victim blaming language. These types of phrases fail to capture the complexity of coercive control, which can occur over a long period of time. Their suggestions included revising the DV-IPV related items to use neutral, accessible language, removing punitive phrasing, and incorporating transparency by sharing the plain language summaries with families. On the surveys, 57% of parents reported experiencing DV-IPV issues during their child welfare involvement. However, 100% disagreed that their family was adequately assessed for DV-IPV. On the legal survey, 60% of respondents disagreed that county staff received clear guidance on using the tools to recognize and respond to DV-IPV issues. On the workforce survey, 19% felt the tools are sensitive to cultural considerations when assessing DV and IPV issues in racially and ethnically diverse families. Collectively, these findings reveal systemic gaps in language, guidance, and application, emphasizing the need for trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and pattern-based approaches to DV-IPV assessment within the child welfare system. Some recommendations include enhancing the DV-IPV assessment items and removing the victim-blaming language, expand training on coercive control, trauma responses, and culturally responsive assessment, standardized processes across counties, and unify definitions and practices across community partners, so everyone's speaking the same language. Next slide. Directive 8, audit the inter-rater reliability of the safety assessment. So our team did this assessed using the 5 case scenarios that were incorporated into the workforce survey. Again, it was only the workforce survey. Participants were presented with hypothetical scenarios, 1 to 2 paragraphs each, and asked to determine whether impending danger was present. Inter-rater reliability was evaluated in this way due to inherent challenges of trying to do something like this in the real world. The percentage of agreement for the correct answer about whether impending danger was present or not for each scenario ranged from 59% to 94%. The results show notable variability in agreement across scenarios, highlighting persistent subjectivity in how workers assess impending danger, especially in situations involving neglect, which includes unmet basic needs or hazardous living conditions. This suggests inconsistent interpretation of key safety concepts. Overall, this exercise underscored the need for clearer guidance and additional support to staff to promote consistency in evaluating impending danger. More practice is needed distinguishing abuse from neglect and differentiating imminent safety threats from conditions that can be improved that would be beneficial. There are limitations of this approach, so we take these with caution, the results with caution. We recommend strengthening guidance on assessing neglect and poverty-related issues, expanding training focused on impending danger criteria using high-quality case examples, and using more robust training cases for future inter-rater reliability checks. And our final directive, Directive 9, audit the required documentation for the planning and removal of a child from the child's primary caregiver. Across perspectives, participants expressed concern that assessment tools alone do not provide a full or reliable picture for determining a child's safety, highlighting the need for clearer guidance, stronger engagement practices, and more comprehensive documentation to support transparent and accurate removal decisions. The reviews of the case files provided insights into how decision-making occurs in a variety of case types. For example, as I said earlier, 6 cases had an initial determination of current or impending danger where the child remained in home with a safety plan. Documentation on these cases provided a thorough exploration of threats of danger and efforts to keep the child in a safe situation with the family. 5 cases had an initial determination of current or impending danger, some with police involvement, and the children were placed out of the home. Contact logs for these cases provided considerable documentation of efforts to protect the child through an out-of-home placement and place the child with kin, and in 2 cases, reunification was achieved. Despite this, lived experience survey respondents generally felt uninformed about the assessment and the decision-making process. Only 7% felt the decisions made during the assessment felt fair and consistent. On the legal survey, 22% believe the criteria within the assessment tools clearly differentiates when removal is warranted versus when in-home interventions may be more appropriate. On a positive note, on the workforce survey, 64% consistently use the tools as the primary basis for child removal. Overall, the findings showed that the tools are intended to guide consistent and objective decision-making. We found they often fall short in practice due to some subjective terminology, limited ability to capture family nuance, some documentation challenges, and inconsistent family engagement. Recommendations around this include enhance narrative and contextual documentation to capture the nuances of the family's circumstances, promote supervisory oversight and case review routines, increase transparency and accountability in removal decisions by establishing clearer expectations for the rationale, ensure that families and legal partners understand the basis for decisions, and upgrade technology and documentation support so that these can happen. So, in conclusion, this audit has generated a multitude of findings and accompanying recommendations. In an effort to consolidate key themes and recommendations, we'll start first with the tools themselves. Although aligned with policy, there's a need to clarify definitions of safety and risk, particularly in terms of observable behaviors of safety assessment and reducing the reliance of historical factors in the risk assessment. These improvements in tool clarity and reliability will require enhanced training with practical case-based learning that is timed to optimize and align with the worker's field exposure. To improve consistency and real-time completion, there's a need to expand mobile and offline technology access, which also is needed to improve consistency across geographic regions, also due to differences in population needs and available resources. You could consider a shared services model across counties and regions, surge staffing for smaller counties, and flexibility in requirements for counties with fewer resources and staff to complete quality assessments. However, the tools, training, and resources to effectively implement the assessment tools ultimately have their greatest impact on the families. As such, it's critical to ensure that the tools are culturally responsive. We recommend standardizing data on race and ethnicity and expanding training on cultural humility and how to mitigate personal bias. The state has acknowledged the need for more effectively assessing DV/IPV issues. This rang true in our findings. We recommend adding indicators of coercive control, removing victim-blaming language, and standardizing the DV/IPV language statewide so that all agencies and partners are aligned in their definitions and in recognizing the indicators of DV/IPV issues. Finally, decision-making, such as child removal versus in-home safety planning, need to be clearly and consistently communicated to families and legal professionals in a timely and cultural sensitive manner. The findings convey serious concerns about consistent implementation, inequitable outcomes, and gaps that may compromise and impact child and family safety. Stakeholders express worry, frustration, and at times fear that the tools do not work as intended. These concerns are not directed at individuals, but as systemic issues: inconsistent county practices, lack of technology infrastructure, unclear definitions, and tool designs that do not match real-world practice. A persistent theme emerged: compassion toward families who feel confused, judged, or harmed by the process, and toward caseworkers who struggle with overwhelming caseloads, inadequate training alignment, and complex and unclear tool requirements. Colorado, on a positive note, benefits from a committed workforce capable of driving meaningful improvements through targeted reforms. That concludes our presentation of the findings, and we will now take some time for questions if you have any in the chat or if you'd like to come off mute and ask any questions. Thank you for your listening attention. It was a lot of information, and I appreciate your patience as we went through it all. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you, Donna. Again, as Donna mentioned, it is a lot of information, but really eager to see your thoughts, your feedback. I will be putting my email in the chat so that if something comes up later on and you'd like to submit some written feedback, we want to make sure we're creating that space for everyone as well, particularly if this is just not the platform that you feel most comfortable giving feedback in. But we have some time together. We have about 30 more minutes. Anyone with questions or comments, please feel free to come off mute. And Courtney, I see that you're ready, so why don't you get us started?
Yeah. Hey, Jordan. Okay, so Donna, bomb recommendations, loving it. However, my first thought goes to, where do we start? I know that, the state's going to get this information right and probably come up with a punch list, and prioritize it. But just from a research perspective, where would you recommend that we start?
Well, it's really not for us to tell you exactly what to do first, but I will just say in the way that we've conceptualized it in the research and in the findings as we've described them, it kind of starts with the tools itself, and it goes tools, training, implementation with the families, how it's received by the families, how it's shared with families and legal professionals, how the decisions are made. So it kind of starts with the tools first, and it kind of cascades from there. So that's just sort of conceptually how we see it, but ultimately it's up to you all to confabulate and figure out what steps you can take.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Also,
I was just going to add to that,
no,
Courtney.
please go ahead, Jordan.
The CPO does have every intention of carrying this forward. So, we'll finish these info sessions this month, and then myself and our team that we're going to convene, we're going to talk about what are working groups going to look like this summer. How can we keep this discussion going, and how do we want to create as a state our plan for some recommendation implementation as well. So just wanted to plug, you're going to keep hearing from us, which is why I really appreciate everyone putting their emails in the chat, because this is just the kicking off point for our work as well. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Courtney. I just wanted
Beautiful.
to add that.
No, no, that's great. And I already was texting with James. I was like, put me on the list for a work group. The other question that I had for the ICF folks is these tools are not evidence-based, or are they?
So in the review of it, and Anne's probably better to address this because she really examined the tools. There is some research that was done some years ago, like 10 years ago, by Colorado State that did reliability testing on the items. But Anna, do you have more to say about that? Then
these tools would not be considered that have been vetted through the 4E clearinghouse, for example, around preventative or practice-based tools that have achieved that level of evidence
Got it.
associated with them.
And what would it take to have them go through that process after a redesign, of course?
So I'm looking at my friend Donna, and I'm going to say a lot of research.
Yeah, you
More
would probably
money?
have to partner with a university
Yeah.
and you'd have to
Okay.
do a sort of a more clinical study, experimental study. And yeah, it would be probably multi-year and would be involved and expensive. But you may find some universities that are interested in partnering with you because they have a need to do some studies in this area. So it's there are options, but it is more involved to try to get to that level of evidence-based, and you'd have to submit
Right.
things to the clearinghouse as you go along.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Lastly, I don't want to be a hog. Am I allowed to ask as a stakeholder how much this study cost?
Of course, I mean, it's state dollars. I don't have the fiscal note in front of me, but if you pull up the fiscal note, Courtney, for House Bill 24-1046, you will see the exact amount of funds that were allocated
Okay.
to our agency
Okay.
for the purposes of completing this audit.
Got it. And did it go over budget to your knowledge, Jordan?
It did not.
Okay. Thanks.
Mhm.
I think James had a note in the chat that I think is important in terms of that, the answer for that. Yeah, and James, there's a lot more information in the actual report that talks about the difference between actuarial and consensus-based models, and so there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot more information in terms of the best practice research and the examination that we did of the tools. So I would also direct you there. Explanation.
And there is a comment here from Brian in the chat. Brian, would you like to come off mute at all to elaborate on this while the team reads through your comment?
Sure. So I was part of a director's focus group that was interviewed for this program, for this assessment. One of the things that was said in our group, at least, which was the group of county directors, was a desire to see the tools more accurately and more efficiently count and deliver information to the caseworker rather than requiring the caseworker to go and do that. Still, we want them to do the critical thinking to reflect on that information, but things like searching for the names of individual people, etc., then having to collect that information, compile that information, and then assess that information is both inefficient in worker time and prone to human error that is often done better by a system as long as things like Soundex searches, are used. So I didn't see anything like that reflected in the report. I did see that the report alluded to more real-time tools. I don't know if it was just kind of vague in that respect, or
Yeah, A lot of the technology recommendations were like that. Also, sort of having fields, if it is, if you have access to it, to have the fields pre-filled in that with information that already exists. That was information that I recall being in the report and suggested by respondents.
And I think, Maddie, I don't know if you facilitated, you look familiar to me. I don't know if you were the one who facilitated our work group, if you want to speak to that or not, or, and I may be wrong about that. You may just look familiar to me otherwise, but I just wanted to see, I think I'm probably the only person who was on that focus group, was on this call. But I just wanted to make that known. I think it's a very important point. The prior history searches, for example, in Colorado, and I've worked in many states, are very inefficient and require the caseworker. Just looking at a case the other day. I was just looking at a case the other day that had, a case where the participant wasn't merged, right? But there were then priors located under multiple people, right, that were relevant and germane to the case. And then the caseworker has to collect that, analyze that, respond to that in a narrative format, rather than having pushed to the worker information that is a clickable, easy to use list with respect to prior history. And given how much information is contained in CLIS, that to me seems like a big miss and a big opportunity for the state in order to improve how caseworkers can receive, analyze information, do it most accurately.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Brian, for coming in and feeding that. Would love to have you drop your email in the chat so we can make sure we get you in that work group discussion that the CPO will be facilitating this summer, so we can keep that conversation piece going. And I will also follow up, because I think, Donna, you mentioned there may have been some information about it, and I want to make sure if that exists, I can get that to Brian so he can see that material as well. But again, would love to keep that discussion going, Brian. I think it would be a valuable point that a lot of our community partners would like to discuss as well. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your participation on the work group, on the focus group. Sorry, I exchanged those terms. Other questions, comments, or feedback? Thanks, Brian. I'll put you on the listserv. I think we'll probably be discussing much further in the summer, so I think there'll be a couple of opportunities as well. And then I did want to pause and just circle back, James. Oh, okay. That adds clarity. Thank you, Ryan, for that. James, I did see you added a couple notes in the chat. I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to come off mute and expand on that thought at all.
Sure, thank you so much. Yeah, the predominant reason I put that in there is sometimes when we think of evidence-based tools, part of that we're thinking about like their validation processes, which I think you did a great job of mentioning how it's a little bit different, right? When we're talking about like clearing house standards and things along those lines. So just for folks to just put in there that our risk assessment tool, it's undergone a pretty rigorous actuarial validation that gives us, those outputs of the risk assessment tool with statistical likelihood of re-referral, reassessment, found abuse, neglect, and open case rates. And I just wanted to highlight, one of the considerations for why we couldn't do that same level of validation with the safety assessment tool, in the sense that, you'd have to have a control group that says a safety intervention is needed, where we would then take no safety intervention and monitor outcomes. Thank you.
It is a large, difficult process to get through to get on the evidence-based clearinghouse list. But as you say, there are alternatives. And I think other states, there's a section in the report that describes the different models, and then there's an attachment of what other states use as tools. And I would refer you to that, and you can set up conversations with other states to see what evidence. I've tried to include some links for things there, because some tools in certain states have a little more evidence and research support around them. But again, most states are using a combined model of actuarial and consensus based, and that seems to be the most accurate. We do briefly talk about predictive analytics, but we don't recommend a particular model for you. We just tell you what the research says, and that. Anne, do you have anything to add there?
It really is individual to each jurisdiction as to how they proceed in their risk and safety tools.
Thank you all for that additional context. I think it's really important for this conversation. I know it's been a subject that has come up really since the beginning of even the interim committee. So I know it's a very deep and thoughtful conversation. Potentially while thoughts are percolating, going back to Courtney's question regarding funding, I am going to drop the fiscal note for House Bill 241046 into the chat for anyone who wants to see it, just because I had some time to grab the link. Other comments, thoughts, suggestions? Okay. Well, I think as many of you know, I definitely am not going, I don't want to force anyone to stay on a Zoom call. So I'm going to put my email in the chat one more time. Again, if something pops in your brain, if you have, oh, thanks, Courtney. If you have thoughts additional, please feel free to email me. We are looking at this. ICF team has been wonderful to work with. Like I said, we're having continuing discussions. So really, this is not the end of a discussion at all. I hope that people will keep coming back to this. And I'm trying to type and talk at the same time, and it's not working. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the wonderful ICF team.
Thank you all. Yeah. Thank you for your attention. And there's a lot of information to take in. Take your time, sift through it, go through the report. There's a lot more in the appendix, lots of details. So don't hesitate to reach out with questions to Jordan. And if there's anything that's unclear, we can help with that.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks all. Take care.